Everybody, and may I also add my welcome to the session today. It's really encouraging to see so many people from so many different parts of the world and so many different organizations joining the webinar. I've been working on violence prevention measures in organizations for over 35 years, and there was a very small handful of us focused on that subject a long time ago. So it's some interest in the topic and the urgency of it, and hopefully also as well the interest in the new resource that we're looking at, which I think takes us further on the journey of trying to create safe organizations and address the fundamental issues underpinning gender-based violence and harassment. There is still a long way to go, though, of course, and we know that there are lots of hurdles to overcome. And indeed, hopefully, you've been given us some sense of the obstacles and the challenges you see to tackling GBVH. So we're going to look at what you've been putting into the Menti link, which hopefully will display as a word cloud. If everybody could cross their fingers now, please, at the same time. Hopefully, here it comes. Quite magical. So this is just, as a quick way of trying to check in with you and look at the kind of things that you're wrestling with when it comes to dealing with GBVH issues in your different organizations. So we can see some of the issues around awareness, so understanding of the nature of the problem itself, building capacity to address it, needing more focus on training, organizational cultures, which we know are so important in developing GBVH initiatives. So a whole range of different issues there, some of them relating to management, gender balance, fears around raising issues and reporting these things in organizations that people maybe feel are not in a great position to handle incidents and deal with complaints effectively and appropriately. Always the issue of resources, human, financial issues of time and competing priorities. But I think, as we can probably see from there, there are some real challenges that we know everyone faces in addressing these things. But we do have some good news as well. There is great opportunity, and certainly over the past few years or so, where we've seen a step change, I think, in the way that organizations have engaged with these issues, including across the private sector. And there is momentum for change, I think. Obviously, the change created by Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter, that's the backdrop for this webinar and hopefully an inspiration for the kind of discussions that we have today. We also have this excellent new resource that we're going to be considering, which I think provides really helpful, practical advice on what companies and organizations can do to learn more about GBVH and how to tackle it effectively. So just a brief reminder of our agenda for today. You should have all seen this in the materials you were sent, but we're going to do a brief introduction from those responsible for commissioning the guidance, CDC, EBRD and IFC, and then a colleague from SDD will provide an overview of the guidance. We then have presentation of case studies. So the guidance is very much about providing practical implementation advice and examples from different industries and different sectors. So we're really pleased to welcome some colleagues who are actively involved in GBVH initiatives in organizations, and they'll share their experience. And then hopefully I'll try and keep time. We'll have a good chunk of time at the end to respond to questions you have, which you will post in the chat box. And we have a distinguished panel to discuss and debate those things. So An exciting lineup, I think. I'm going to make way now for Andrea Cullinan from IFC, Sarah Ruck from EBRD, and Nomsa Fulbrook-Kagwe from CDC. They're just going to make some introductory remarks and just give us some of the background and the context to this whole initiative. Over to you, Andrea.
Of course I'd do that. A very good morning, a good afternoon and a good evening to you all, and a very warm welcome to everyone who has joined us for this inaugural global webinar on this topic. So on behalf of the International Finance Corporation, it gives me great pleasure to join you here today. And it really makes me happy to celebrate the efforts of so many companies who are working hard to create safe, healthy and respectful workplaces, free of gender-based violence and harassment. So from the outset, let me acknowledge that this good practice note that we will discuss today is a testimony actually to your commitment, to your talent, to your leadership and to your persistence. It also gives us the opportunity to reflect on the challenges that still remain and reminds us to step up for more progress. Dear members of the business community, dear colleagues, dear participants, gender-based violence and harassment is a universal problem that's occurring in every culture and every social group. In fact, the research tells us that non-contact, unwanted sexual experiences, a category that includes sexual harassment in any setting, is actually the most prevalent form of sexual violence for both women and men. So one thing we know is clear, and that is addressing gender-based violence and harassment is good for business. And we will learn more about why that's true during this webinar. But we also know the opposite is true. Not taking action to prevent and respond to GBVH carries significant risks for firms and investors as well. So let me focus a little quickly now on what IFC is doing about this. We know, well, IFC is committed to preventing and appropriately responding to incidents of sexual exploitation and abuse, to sexual harassment, and other forms of gender-based violence across all its investments. We share this in common with the other financial institutions. IFC is contributing to the shift towards prevention and response to GBVH in the workplace. How are we doing that? We're trying to build capacity. We try to generate knowledge, for example, through this good practice note. We try to raise awareness with our clients, and we add to the business case on why this actually matters as an integral part of our environment, social and governance work. To assist with managing these risks, IFC offers guidance. We try to be very practical, actually. We try to offer guidance to our clients regarding the possible prevention measures like codes of conduct, grievance mechanisms, and response measures as well for the project. So we really understand that this is a new piece of work for many businesses, so we are here to try and support and be helpful. Dear colleagues, dear listeners, dear business, really just now like to highlight 3 key points. 1, the evidence suggests that well-intentioned good practice, such as mandatory policies about and complaints procedures for dealing with sexual harassment, are actually ineffective if they're not well implemented. So they must be well implemented. And if the workplace culture is unsupportive to that implementation, then these procedures do not work. What does this mean? It means that we need strong leadership. It means that we need inclusive policy development. We need proactive role modelling from senior management to sit alongside the promotion of respectful relationships in the company. For IFC, to understand what these gender-based violence risks mean to a company, we look at policies, we look at practices, we look at norms that affect the incidence of violence both inside and outside companies, because it doesn't happen in isolation. We then understand that the risks to a company come not only from its activities, but from other factors such as the cultural norms, such as government policies, ways laws, policies are enforced. So for that reason, we are realists. We understand that these issues have some limitations on what you can influence. However, IFC really does seek to name gender-based violence as a material risk to business and to support investments to create positive change. The second point I'd really like to make now is sexual harassment in the workplace does not occur in isolation. It doesn't. It's facilitated by communities, by workplaces, by a society that tolerates such behaviour. So therefore, addressing sexual harassment at work needs to be seen in the wider context of taking actions to stop violence, including the promotion of gender equality initiatives and the acceptance of more flexible gender roles. My third point I'd like to make, and for me this is really the key point, and that is evidence shows that sexual harassment can have severe and lasting consequences for victims and others in the workplace, both physically, emotionally, mentally, as well as economically in terms of career development. So therefore, this necessitates ongoing support for those survivors, those people actually affected. All too often, what happens in reality is that those who raise concerns are ignored, they have their cases dismissed, and this adds to their distress. So ultimately, we can never lose sight of who all these efforts are for, and that is the survivors, and we need to ensure the safety and their well-being. This involves doing no harm in all our approaches, and that is why this good practice note and the learning we are gaining every day from businesses and partnerships with yourselves is really so important. It reminds us that the priority of anyone addressing gender-based violence and harassment must be to put people's safety first, do no harm, support survivors. In conclusion, dear colleagues, gender-based violence is a global human rights violation. It's widespread, it's complex, and it's costly. It can affect any of us or any business. IFC commends this good practice note to you. We wish you a fruitful discussion, and on behalf of IFC, thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Andrea. I'm going to pass over now to Sarah.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Paul. And hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining this webinar. We're very impressed with the turnout today. The presentation presented today for us is part of a broader endeavor to reduce the risk of GBVH from occurring in our lending here at the EBRD. I'd like to take a moment to talk about the EBRD's new policy requirements that were effective in January this year related to GBVH, and then the internal procedures we've developed to operationalize these new requirements. Let me start by saying that this has not been a quick fix and that we're just getting started on this journey. Working on and learning from the publication with the benefits of IFC's and STD's experience has been of tremendous help to us. Though much remains to be accomplished. We recognize that GBVH is a violation of human rights, and combating it is key to building equitable, participatory, and sustainable economies. Through our gender strategy and our environmental and social policy, we are committed to mainstream gender across our operations, which includes both safeguarding and the promotion of gender equality. So in our new environmental and social policy, we focused on strengthening two performance requirements that are most relevant to GBVH, namely those related to labor and working conditions and those on community health and safety. Regarding project workers, clients are now required to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace and ensure that worker grievance mechanisms provide for measures to report incidents safely and confidentially. New measures related to safe worker accommodation have also been included in the performance requirement. Regarding project communities, clients will need to assess risks to project-affected communities and, where necessary, develop measures to prevent and address risks of sexual exploitation and abuse. Here too, grievance mechanisms must ensure that incidents and allegations can be reported safely without any risk of retaliation or further harm. We have then developed some procedures to operationalize these new requirements. We have developed a risk screening tool to identify different risk levels associated with all of our projects. This takes account of country risks and project-specific risks. Each risk rating calls for a specific set of questions to be answered during our appraisal and a set of actions for clients that are needed to comply with our policies. High-risk ratings will require third-party expert assessment. However, we do recommend that external GBVH expertise be employed by our clients as much as possible, as long as this expertise is not available in-house. The risk of causing more harm while trying to prevent or respond to GBVH are significant. A new provision in our legal agreement also requires clients to report immediately any incidents or allegations of GBVH to the bank. We have created a GBVH focal point comprised of senior social and health and safety advisors who are responsible for reviewing risk rating and monitoring the implementation of the procedures and handling reports of GBVH. Finally, we have started to provide training to environmental and social advisors and gender champions across the bank, but we are working on providing more of those through a comprehensive implementation framework. In conclusion, I'd just like to reiterate that the protection from GBVH and the promotion of gender equality must go hand in hand. We hope that the publication will equip our clients with the necessary knowledge and tools to start their own journey toward workplaces and project communities where GBVH is not tolerated, and everyone is encouraged to speak out. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Sarah. And finally, Nomsa.
Many thanks. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. My name is Nomsa Fulbrook-Kagwe, and I work for the CDC Group, which is the British Development Finance Institution. I specifically sit in CDC's Environmental, Social and Governance team and have been working with the IFC, EBRD and SDD on the development of this note. I think just before kicking off on the webinar, I wanted to take the opportunity to share a couple of reflections from CDC's perspective. And I think the first one is that, when we started developing this guidance on addressing GBVH about 18 months ago, we had no idea how timely it would feel when it was finally published this year in July. And it definitely comes at a time where I think we're grappling with unforeseen socioeconomic impacts of COVID, and particularly the disproportionate impacts that this is having from a gender perspective. I think some actually have called GBVH a pandemic within an ongoing pandemic. And I think to give an indication of this issue, the United Nations Population Fund estimates that an additional 31 million cases of GBVH were reported in just the first 6 months alone of COVID. I think 2020 has also provided us with a realization that we have a lot more work to do that I think Sarah has just alluded to. And that's on addressing all forms of inequity on gender, but I think on also many other fronts. And so for me, this also comes at a very pertinent time. I think reflecting globally and specifically within CDC's universe, I'm happy to say that we have made good progress on gender equality and women's economic empowerment. And I think one of the key global milestones last year, which was the development of the ILO Convention 190 on gender-based violence and harassment in the world of work, was a very important milestone. We've also made good progress since the Safeguarding Summit, which was held in 2018, where international financial institutions, including CDC, EBRD, and IFC, committed to take actions to prevent sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. And I think among those 7 principles that we're committed to at the Safeguarding Summit, I just wanted to specifically highlight principle number 7, which is one of the most relevant for investment institutions, in that it commits us to support clients to develop and implement policies and mechanisms that address sexual harassment, abuse, and exploitation. Since the Safeguarding Summit, CDC has taken active steps to address GBVH and wider safeguarding risks. And this guidance note is one of the ways in which we have sought to address this important issue. We obviously continue to work with the private sector and specifically also focus on working with fund managers and companies whom we invest with. And I just, again, wanted to share some of the actions we've been taking over the past year. I think the first is the revision of CDC's investment agreements across all ways in which we invest, to specifically include requirements around the proactive prevention as well as response to incidents when they do occur from a GBVH perspective. I think, as Andrea mentioned, I think naming what it is key, and being explicit about it is also key. And so this is why we've sought to specifically call this out in all our investment and legal agreements. We've also gone through the process of revising our contractual agreements with consultants to specifically call out GBVH and safeguarding risks. The second way in which we were looking to address this is the incorporation of questions into our annual monitoring reporting requirements to improve how we manage our portfolio from a GBVH perspective. And we've also recently developed an incident management procedure for how to deal with incidents within CDC's portfolio as and when they do occur, to ensure that we're responding to them appropriately. And I think we've had a lot of learnings on that, even in a relatively short period of time. I think most importantly, and I think again this was highlighted by IFC and EBRD, is to ensure that when we're responding to incidents, that we're working with fund managers and companies to ensure that the principles of a survivor-centered approach are really are implemented and monitored. And I'd say lastly, I think beyond our revisions to our processes at CDC, we are continuing to make an intentional effort to raise our collective and institutional awareness around how we're investing. And that's through the ongoing socialization of these issues, as well as training and capacity building. I think, as Andrea noted, leadership, commitment, culture, and accountability is key. I think within CDC, and obviously something that we talk to investees about. So I'd like to say lastly, and I think from a personal note, I'd like to share that I think in developing this note with STD, IFC, and EBRD, it's really changed my level of understanding around the complexity and the depth of this issue. And it's no easy feat, and I think as everybody has said to me, that there is a lot of work to be done, but I'm also very encouraged by the fact that we are being very intentional and proactive about addressing the work that we face. And I think secondly is that in developing this guidance, it's really helped me think practically about addressing these risks, often because they're systemic and they're hidden, and how to address them in the remit of work that I'm in. So I really hope that today's webinar is useful for everybody in that regard, and it does the same in challenging your thinking, but also thinking about how to practically implement this and drive change. I hope you all enjoyed the webinar, and I'll hand over to Paul. Thank you.
Thanks, Nomsa, and thank you, Andrea and Sarah as well. I think you've really set the guidance note in context, and thank you for sharing information on the kind of initiatives that you're taking in your organisations. I think this really is a great resource, and I'm going to hand over now to Vidya from SDD, who will provide some background and overview of the guidance and its content. So Vidya, over to you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So to introduce the products, a team of us at Social Development Direct, including myself, Sally Neville, Tasneem Salam, and Erica Fraser, have worked closely with EBRD, IFC, and CDC to develop guidance for private sector companies and investors on addressing gender-based violence and harassment, or GBVH. The main guidance document is divided into two parts. So Part A explains GBVH and outlines a moral and business case for addressing it. And Part B outlines emerging good practice in assessing, preventing, responding to, and monitoring GBVH. There is also a useful set of practical tools included in the annexes. These are designed to help you implement the guidance. For example, there's a template provided for a company GBVH policy. The discussion today is focused specifically on GBVH rather than violence and harassment more broadly. The term GBVH is taken from the 2019 ILO Convention concerning the elimination of violence and harassment in the world of work. What sets GBVH apart from other types of violence and harassment is that it is rooted in gender inequality, and it's directed at people because of their sex or gender, or disproportionately affects people of a particular sex or gender. GBVH can also be used to punish people who don't conform to socially ascribed gender stereotypes and expected roles and behaviours. As a result, GBVH can be targeted at people because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. It can take a range of forms, namely sexual forms, including sexual exploitation, abuse, or harassment, physical forms, including the threat or actual use of force, psychological forms, including verbal abuse, and economic forms, including restricting someone's access to money or essential resources. The guidance focuses on GBVH in circumstances where companies and investors have a degree of influence and where their operations might be contributing to these risks. These include GBVH among workers in a company and its supply chain, between workers and community members, between workers and service users, among users of company services or infrastructure, by local authorities against workers, community members, and or service users, and within workers' families and intimate relationships. Although not explicitly addressed in this guidance, those who work for investors can also perpetrate and experience GBVH. Now, there are strong moral and ethical reasons for addressing GBVH, some of which have been touched upon earlier today. And there is also a compelling business case. GBVH can have negative impacts on the physical, mental, and sexual and reproductive health of individuals and their families, and on their financial well-being. For businesses and investors, the impact of GBVH on individuals can result in poor performance at work. It can affect the decisions people make about work, can damage relationships with local communities, and in some cases can result in legal action against businesses. For those who speak out against GBVH, the stakes can be extremely high, and in some cases even life-threatening. The guidance is underpinned by a set of overarching principles which are designed to ensure actions to prevent and respond to GBVH are safe and do not risk causing further harm. The principles focus on efforts being survivor-centered and safe by prioritizing the needs of people who have experienced and witnessed GBVH, context-specific by taking the local legal and social context into account, integrated by embedding efforts in existing processes and management systems, inclusive by recognizing heightened risks for certain groups, non-discriminatory by locating efforts in wider approaches to promote diversity, and collaborative and well-informed by drawing on expertise when needed. As well as describing how to assess and monitor risks, the guidance sets out 7 areas of action to prevent GBVH from happening in the first place, and encouraging safe reporting when it does. The 7 areas relate to leadership and company culture, policies and codes of conduct, grievance mechanisms and investigation procedures, recruitment and performance assessment, training and awareness raising, working with contractors and suppliers, and physical design. Advice is also provided in the guidance on how firms can adopt a phased approach rather than expecting them to do everything at once. In the invitation to this event, you should all have been sent the guidance that has been produced. This includes the main guidance document, which is relevant across all sectors, and then 3 shorter sectoral briefs that focus on manufacturing, public transport, and construction. There was also a pre-recorded audio presentation with accompanying slides, which provides an introduction to the topic and talks through the type of information you'll find in the guidance. Thank you very much, and I'll now hand back to Paul.
Many thanks, Vidya. Yeah, it is an excellent resource. I've read many examples of guidance. I think this is one of the clearest and most helpful I've come across. It's a great introduction to the subject area and practical guide to implementation. So congratulations to everyone concerned with this. As Vida mentioned that there's a real emphasis on highlighting emerging good practice in the guidance and offering practical examples of initiatives and measures introduced to organisations across different sectors. So quite rightly, this webinar is also keen to offer insights from those actively engaged in GBVH initiatives. So we have some case study examples to present. We're going to reverse the order slightly. One of our colleagues is running on emergency batch at the moment, so we're hoping to go with it. I go to case study 3 initially, which is from Dean Laplanche, who's a senior gender and gender-based violence consultant with Factive Consulting. He's been working with a number of different organisations such as the World Bank, ILO, UN Women, has been managing global research projects and consultancies to promote gender-smart solutions in the private sector. So, Dean, I hope you're still there. I'm going to hand over to you now and you take us through your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Can I just confirm, because I have had to switch computer, that everybody can hear me?
You're breaking up a little, Dean, but yeah, we can see you, and maybe we lose your video, and hopefully we stick with your audio.
Sure, I'll switch the video off. It should be okay. This is the problems of living in the middle of nowhere. Unfortunately, power does go out from time to time, but thank you all very much. I'm very happy and pleased to be able to talk to you today and share some of my experience of undertaking gender-based violence assessments in communities and also in workplaces globally. I have an interest in the private sector and humanitarian space, both at an academic level, but also at a practical implementation level. The way I'm going to speak today is to share with you 3 challenges that I think we face when we're delivering gender-based violence, taking gender-based violence risk mitigation actions in the private. Give you some examples of how these challenges are being addressed, sometimes in small ways, but also in important ways. So the first one is around power. The actions, the idea here is that the actions that we take to address gender-based violence risks should actively challenge existing power inequalities, and especially gender inequality. A root cause of gender-based violence is gender inequality, and this is a basic lesson in gender-based violence training. The situation that gender inequality is manifested in the restrictions that are placed on women and girls, such as lack of freedom of movement or reduced opportunities to earn money, access education, control of their bodies and reproduction, and so on. These restrictions are imposed socially, culturally, politically, legally, and this situation increases the risk for women and girls to experience abuse, exploitation, and violence. It's therefore important that in order to do effective gender-based violence and harassment work, whatever we do has to show gender equality in action. The actions we take themselves have to challenge the gender inequality that exists. So examples of action that risk not that exist reinforcing gender inequality, so not challenging the gender inequality, would be, for example, developing a grievance mechanism without engaging female employees or without first supporting women and girls in local communities, simply establishing a grievance mechanism without their input. Another action that risks reinforcing gender inequality is when there is full responsibility for managing cases is given to exclusively a senior management team, especially if the management team comprises only men, and therefore women's experiences and women's ideas are not taken into account. Another practice that reinforces gender inequality, and this is often one that I see being carried out, is where, despite the fact that a business will have protocols in place for managing allegations and managing incidents, often a senior manager will then decide to step in because they see the matter as important. But again, what this does is it takes control, it takes the power away from the processes that has been put in place. Another action that risks reinforcing gender inequality is stopping at the basic safeguarding mechanisms. So having policies in place, but not moving beyond that to provide the tools that workers and community members need to be empowered to respond and manage these cases, to be empowered to speak out and call out the behaviors that affect them. And another action, that this is also one that I often see that reinforces gender inequality, is that when a report is filed, the person who is affected or the survivors of the harassment or the violence are not engaged in the process. They are not asked what services do they require, what support do they want. They're not asked to be active participants in the response. And so that control is taken out of their hands. If you could, Shireen, if you could just please click the slide for me. These are examples of where actions are challenging the gender inequality that exists. Like I say, some of them are small actions, but it's a start of this journey to make sure that the actions that we're taking are addressing gender inequalities. So in Myanmar, there have been a number of industries, a number of companies that have looked at facilitating employer-centric sessions. So the very beginning of their work is to ask their employees, how do you understand sexual harassment? What are the issues that are affecting you? And how do we as an organization want to focus on certain behaviors that you are concerned about? In a garment factory in Jordan, we've successfully managed to encourage the managers who were handling allegations. We successfully encouraged them to allow us to do a review of their management cases, of the processes that they'd taken, in order to be able to point out to them some of the gaps in their knowledge and skills and some of the harm that they may have been doing as a result of their processes. We were using that activity in order to show them that they may actually be reinforcing gender inequalities through their actions. I think the most powerful example that I've seen, though, of and been involved in making sure that the actions we take challenge gender inequalities is in the development of a training course which was supported by the IFC Gender Advisory Team in Papua New Guinea and is now run through the Business Coalition for Women, where there has been a development of a training course that trains female staff how to run their own safety audits, to look at issues that affect them in the workplace, including harassment and violence, or when traveling to and from work. So the female staff are provided with the skills to be able to explore those issues themselves and make decisions themselves on how they wish the company to respond. Thank you, Shireen. The next challenge that we have is making sure that we don't lose sight that we're actually looking at damaging systems and practices, not just singular incidents or bad individuals. So there are many different kinds of behaviors that constitute gender-based violence and harassment. Rape is one of the 6 core types of gender-based violence used in the GBV information management system in humanitarian work on gender-based violence. There are other types such as physical assault, forced marriage, denial of resources. We can also use categories such as child sexual abuse, domestic violence, intimate partner violence. Or we can refer to specific behaviors such as unwanted touching, intrusive questions about the body, unwanted sexual advances, etc. The risk is that the work that we do focuses very much on isolated incidents. And therefore, what we focus on, what we look at are individual bad behaviors and individual bad people. And examples of actions that risk too much focus on this singular are when in the trainings or the policies, we emphasize the need to stop the bad behaviors of bad people without recognizing that we're all part of these social systems, of these gender systems that create the inequalities and allow the violence to happen and to continue. And similarly, there's often a risk of focusing on zero tolerance punishment of all behaviors. Zero tolerance it's a little bit of a debated term. It means, what it should mean is that there are no incidents that are considered unworthy of being investigated or addressed. But it doesn't mean that there needs to be punishment, strict punishment for every incident. We all are part of the system. We all make mistakes. And in many cases, people who are the recipients of sexual harassment or verbal harassment simply want the behavior to stop. And they want to be able to have the conversation, or for somebody to have the conversation with the person, so that we can all learn to change our attitudes and change our behaviors. Another issue that often risks focusing on too much of the singular is when we get reports that highlight specific incidents of rape or focus on one particular incident without paying attention to the everyday incidents that occur, the everyday verbal harassment of women and girls in communities. That is also an important part of this discussion. Thank you, Shireen. So good practice examples that I've seen of where we've really challenged, where we've really been working to look at this as bad systems, as damaging and hurtful systems, and not focus too much on the individual, is in Canada, for example. There have been some very successful facilitated sessions to bring mining companies and NGOs together to work on this issue. The two sides don't speak the same language all the time and have very different approaches, but making sure that they can work together to address the issue together. In garment factories in Jordan, we've updated manager training to include a discussion on the continuum of violence, so that managers can understand that a verbal abuse is a part of that continuum, and that they must also pay attention to the everyday in order to prevent the more extreme, the more damaging incidents from occurring. And also widely, I think we're seeing an increase in emphasis and training on bystander and witness intervention techniques at an early stage, so that we are empowered to call out the behaviors early on. We are empowered to say something, and we're supported in doing that, so that we can learn earlier on to change our behaviors and change those systems. Thank you, Shireen. Finally, the last one is the challenge that we have is to make sure that the GBVH, the work that we do to prevent GBVH or to build better response systems, should be inclusive. There are many barriers to making this work inclusive. We talk about there are people that don't want to talk about certain topics or recognize the existence of certain groups of people. Maybe we don't have the knowledge of those topics, or we're afraid to talk about them. We have personal biases and prejudices against certain groups of people. But the work has to be inclusive, and it has to be diverse. So examples where it's not inclusive is where we talk about women and girls' vulnerabilities as all the same, without recognizing that their vulnerabilities are different because of race and religion and literacy levels and age and economic status. So we talk about the single group of women and girls rather than recognizing difference. Or we don't address the risks that men and boys face in terms of suffering gender-based violence and harassment. We don't talk about the sexual violence that men face in male-dominated workplaces, or the position of adolescent boys as perpetrators and victims of gender-based violence and harassment. Or we ignore the high-level risks that are faced by non-binary people, gender non-binary people, transgender people, and people whose sexual activities are maybe considered illegal or immoral in certain contexts, such as sex workers and men who have sex with men. There is, in my experience, and it's very difficult to have those discussions and to encourage people to open up the work so it's inclusive and it includes the vulnerable people at the margins, who also need to be able to call out and report and have support when they experience gender-based violence and harassment. Shireen, thank you. And so a couple of examples of good practice where I'm seeing this is that we are recognizing diversity is in an infrastructure project in West Africa, partnering with NGOs that are already working with these groups at the margins. And this is, it's not exclusive to that one project. I have seen this elsewhere where the gender-based violence work is integrated into existing health programs. So it provides an entry point to have a conversation with sex workers or men who have sex with men about the risks of violence that they face. In a project in Ukraine, we managed to push to include sexual orientation in an anti-discrimination policy, which may seem like a very small thing, but there was a big debate to get that done because of the context in Ukraine around the backlash against different sexual orientations, and to really be able to work with a client to help them understand that this was an important part of their anti-discrimination policy. And in the Middle East and North Africa region, we're seeing various company-supported training programs now to help upskill gender-based violence professionals who also have internalized prejudice and biases, particularly against trans persons and the homosexual community, to get them to understand that the guiding principle of gender-based violence is treating everybody equal and enabling them to change their attitudes and behaviors so that they can support the companies who are wanting to do the same. Thank you very much. As I say, very happy to have presented today, and I'd like to hand back to Paul now.
Thanks a lot, Dean. That was fantastic. Lots of great there, which I'm not going to try and summarize in the interest of time. So I'd quite like to move us along. We're running slightly behind. I want to leave opportunity for discussion, questions and answers at the end. So I'd reiterate, if people want to post questions as we go along, either in relation to the presentations or other questions in general, please do so, and we'll gather those together and try and respond to them at the end. We're going to move on, and I'm going to ask Tamar now to do her presentation. She works in the field of municipal transport and heads up donor organisation relations for the Tbilisi Transport Company. So she leads projects and programmes financed by donor organisations, including the Gender Advisory Programme financed by EBRD. So she's going to tell you about initiatives in TTC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Hello, dear participants. My name is Tamar Majavariani, and I'm a donor coordinator manager at Tbilisi Transport Company, Georgia. Before starting talking about the project implemented by my company, I would like to say a few words about the city where my company operates and about the company itself. Tbilisi is the capital of Georgia. Georgia is located in the heart of the Caucasus, on the crossroads between Asia and Europe. Tbilisi covers an area of 726 kilometers with a population of approximately 1.5 million people. So Tbilisi Transport Company is entirely owned by Tbilisi municipality. The Tbilisi Transport Company was formed in 2009 as a result of merging two companies, Tbilisi Metro and Tbilisi Buses. Since 2009, Tbilisi Transport Company provides public transport services by buses, metro, and cable cars, and it covers the entire city of Tbilisi, and also Tbilisi's parking system with 28,870 parking places joined to our company in 2018. So the next, thank you. Tbilisi, I gladly want to say that Tbilisi Transport Company is one of the largest company in the labor market in Georgia. There are 6,264 employees in our company who works to ensure high quality transport services for the residents of Tbilisi and city guests, and to provide safe and comfortable traveling throughout the city. I would like to present our company in gender sense too. On the slide, you can see how women and men are divided according to the positions. As it's visible, we have women in the top management. A financial director is one of the decision makers in the company. The database we have in the company allows to identify gender gaps. Currently, the number of employees is 6,264 people, out of which 1,399 are women and 4,865 are men. Also, this existing database allows us to divide information according to age and experience, which are especially useful in case of promotion. Thank you. The next slide shows information about cooperation with the BRD. In 2016, Tbilisi Transport Company purchased 143 new buses, commonly known as blue buses, with a loan of European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The project implementation agreement between TTC and EBRD included a complementary project on promoting equal opportunities. After a procurement procedure, a consortium consisting of AETS from France and OQ Consulting from Netherlands was selected to implement the Gender Advisory Program in Tbilisi Transport Company. This project was generously funded by the government of Japan through the Japan EBRD Cooperation Fund. Thank you. The next slide. The Gender Advisory Program began in 2017 with a gender audit in TTC. Some of the basic issues were identified. Based on the recommendations of this audit, we prepared action plan in line with the 7 Women's Empowerment Principles of UN Women, which became a guideline for the formulation of action plan tailored to the situation of company. TTC Gender Advisory Program was supported by TTC, strengthening its implementation. In frame of the cooperation with such a call, in 2018 and 2019, TTC participated in 60-day Orange Ribbon campaign initiated by the municipality of Tbilisi, which was oriented to end violence against women. The campaign was held in municipal transport and bus stops, where citizens were urged to raise their voices against violence, to defend their and other rights. We distributed information leaflets to maximize awareness and inform that violence is punishable. Deputy of Mayor, who led to this campaign, addressed to all women to raise their voice in case of violence, and to call to police and appeal to non-governmental organizations in order to protect their rights. Thank you. The next slide. So in frame of Gender Advisory Program, Tbilisi Transport Company actively collaborated with UN Women. With UN Women's support, the company has developed and improved the policies of prevention, sexual harassment and equal opportunities, and also we adopted compliant mechanisms for sexual harassment. 35 heads of structural units of Tbilisi Transport Company underwent a training in sexual harassment and compliance mechanism, which was conducted by UN Women and where the participants discussed cases of harassment and violence. Finally, the company has a compliant mechanism where employees as well as the citizens can submit their complaints, which are treated in a confidential way. Thank you. The next slide, please. So the policies. I want to say about the main purpose of the policies. The main purpose of the policy of sexual harassment is to prevent sexual harassment in the company and create environment free of sexual harassment. The policy is based on Georgian legislation, international standards, and best practices of the worldwide. The policy covers the compliance submitted by employees, contractors, and other persons on the company's territory. Thank you. So now I would like to sum up what we have done. Now, please I need the before file. No. Next. Yes. Now I want to show what we have done. So a few words about what we have done is that with the part of EBRD, UN Women and our consultant team, Tbilisi Transport Company became, as a gender-proof company, has approved policies on sexual harassment and equal opportunities, and is recognized as one of the first company in the world to engage in WEPs in the transport service sector. So a few words now about the company's future plans is that in frame of new loan agreement between EBRD and Georgia, which was signed on April 2020, we're going to purchase the 40 metro cars and modernize the Poded tunnel. This project also aims to promote gender equality and improve health and safety standards. This includes on-the-job trainings, which promotes employment and addressing equal opportunities in the urban transport sector. So, this is all what I want to say in my presentation today. Thank you for your attention, and we are always open to share information and our experience. Thank you.
Many thanks, Tamar. That was really interesting, lots of great insights and nice and clear and concise, so thank you for that. Anish, I hope you're still with us and you're going to complete our case study presentations. Anish is currently working with Ecom Express, a logistics company in India. So thank you for joining us. I expect it's getting quite late in the evening for you. Anish is the general manager, human resources general manager in Ecom Express. He has a background in business, HR, and diversity and inclusion. He's done lots of things, worked and studied in the US, worked with large brands such as LG Electronics, and is going to tell us about some of the experiences within Ecom Express. Thank you very much, Anish.
Thank you, Paul, for the introduction. Hopefully everybody is able to hear me.
You're nice and clear. Thank you.
Great. So I will like to make it a little bit quicker so that we can catch up on the time. So I represent an organization by the name of Ecom Express in India. And Ecom Express is a delivery logistics company which is focused towards e-commerce business itself. We are categorized as a mature startup now, considering that we are nearly 7 years old. So just to give you a brief introduction about my organization. So we came into picture in 2013, and the four co-founders who were colleagues previously decided to venture independently into the logistics sphere to service the ever-growing e-commerce delivery requirement in India. We have had a pretty steep growth curve since then. Just to give you an idea, currently we operate 2,780 centers across India, delivery centers, which are supported by close to 200 support facilities. We cover 92% of Indian geography, with a signature on close to 93% of the Indian population, with a PIN code coverage of close to 26,000, which effectively makes me an organization which is present across the board in India. More importantly, to service such a large board across India is the manpower strength that we have. Currently, we are sitting around 38,000 people in our organization, and because of the holiday season approaching fast, this number is going to go to up to 50,000 people in the next 1.5 months. So we'll be operating with an organization which is close to 50,000 people spread across India in small towns, villages, centers, all connected through one common network over here. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so let me first define the problem statement over here. Logistics sector traditionally and in current times also is a very much male dominated sector. In terms of logistics, there is a huge gap between perception of what you think about logistics when it is mentioned to you versus how it has evolved to the current state. We did a dipstick study in the employer market to understand when I say that I work for a logistics company, what is the two images which come to your mind? For most people, it was either a truck or a warehouse. They could not connect anything else with it. So that particular sort of mindset also brings with it challenges that people are unaware of what all things are done in the logistics industry. Because of the traditional linkages, it is predominantly a male-dominated one, in which, because it's a 24/7 operation always, till now, they have the predominant population, or nearly the 100% population has always been male. So if we wanted to understand the problem, so there is a huge reluctance which comes in to allow the females also to join this particular industry. That can be because of the entrenched masculinities, that can be because of their own prejudices, which think that the girls or the women will not be able to work 24/7 in the centers that we have operational. That can also be because if there are too few people from one gender, the other can start behaving which is totally ignoring or agnostic to their presence. This also relates to the downline effects that we have a poor retention for women. And also it sometimes doesn't allow them to balance their work and family life balance the way they should be in the ordinary circumstances. So from the start of this organization, we were very, very clear that what type of organization we want to. So there are two ways to reach a particular set stage, particularly with this particular topic. Either I wait for an incident to happen, or we proactively go out and create an environment which is conducive to this whole environment, requirement that we are putting in place. This whole endeavor was supported by incidences which we were recording and correcting on the spot. But this also helped us put in place a broad-based framework, which allowed us to have an organization sensitized on how we want to behave and operate. I would like to take an example over here. So typically what happens that when I have a warehouse being run, so I will have my field workforce who will have a supervisor. And normally between multiple supervisors, they will collect the phone number of their staff that they are supervising so that they can effectively communicate between them. Also between the various shifts, because there will be shift mergers happening, shift overlap happening. So nobody minded that, okay, if the next supervisor who's not supervising me is collecting my phone number, because everybody was of the same gender, so they did not fear any threat on that. But when we started introducing female employees also into our centers, and when the people from the other shifts started asking their numbers, there were concerns raised that how will that particular thing be used. So at point taken, we put a hold that, okay, only the shift supervisor will be able to take the contact details for the effective coordination. Nobody else will be taken. And also to give a better sense of security to those people, every location which had female workforce, we introduced a security setup which consisted of the security guards as well as presence of HR in those centers, so that these people, the women or the girls operating over there, do not have any sort of apprehension, fear, / all the underlying factors, and they can freely reach out for any help, guidance, mentorship, etc., without having any two thoughts about it. Also, we did extensive amount of travel. I myself visited a lot of centers to understand what are the things which we have currently available in terms of infrastructure, because we have always been thinking about from the male side or the male perspective, are my facilities across India right now set up in a manner that I can provide a safe working environment, which is also comfortable to both or more than one genders over there. So we did a comprehensive audit of all our facilities to understand where are the gaps which will prevent us to seamlessly integrate more people from the other gender into it, so that these things are not taken up against us. Can we move to the next slide, please? To facilitate this particular complete journey of sensitizing the organization against any sort of gender violence and prejudices and harassment, we made concrete and pointed efforts into the following categories. Number one was the policies and procedures. We relooked at all the policies and procedures that we had to understand which are the ones which can drive anything which is not we want to, and we made effective changes against it. Second was training and awareness. A lot of times we saw that the behavior which was not recommended was getting driven because of the lack of awareness of how to even behave in a certain situation. When a supervisor has for last 20 years of his life only worked with male members, sometimes he's ill-equipped to even understand what are the changes in behavior that he will have to make for him to operate in an environment where there are more than one genders. So we did a lot of training over there. The third is the grievance mechanism. How are we capturing the grievances and addressing them with the primary requirement of building the confidence in the system that if there is an issue, nobody will be hiding it. They will be feeling safe to present it to us for a resolution. The next was the audit of required infrastructure as well as locations. Where can we bring in more people to work with us in a safe environment? Next one was the background verification. We wanted to cut out the risk of unsavory people in our system. So we introduced a complete plethora of background checks for the people that we were hiring. And also to increase the participation, we also realized that we will not be able to just hire people from other organizations or locations to increase our mix. We will have to create opportunities by educating people around that this is also a sector that you guys can work with in a safe environment. So we started concrete effort in terms of giving us an yearly targets of how much mix we want to achieve every year. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so I would like to talk about a little over here in terms of the previous slide, what were the concrete things done in each of the areas, which gave us the maximum amount of results. So number one, in policies and procedures, the first thing that we did was to roll out an equal employment opportunity policy, which clearly stated that we are an equal opportunity employer. Basis, there will be no prejudices or preferences of any nature till the time the job requirements are signed off or accommodated. We also rolled out a code of conduct, which was provided to every employee of the organization on joining, as well as reinforced a couple of times that this is the code of conduct of the organization. We want to work in a certain way, and you are supposed to also adhere to that. Then we also rolled out a POSH policy. So POSH is the prevention of sexual harassment. It's so we have a comprehensive POSH policy in place in which any case which falls under the sexual nature in the organization, there is a set defined team which takes up those cases on extreme priority. And this whole thing is taken very, very seriously. And it has a zero tolerance policy against it. In addition to that, we also introduced a grievance channel, which was completely anonymous, in which any particular thing that anybody wanted to report or bring up, which were not getting captured in anything else, could be presented over there. So it has been operational for more than a year now and has been working beautifully for us. Next one is on the training and awareness. As I shared before, sometimes when in an industry where there is no presence of females before or women before, there is a gap in terms of understanding from the male counterparts of how to even behave, what constitutes harassment. If there is something happening, how to even report that at particular incident. So all these things were taken care under our awareness in the training initiatives, in which we set up a program that beforehand we introduce any or open up any new center for women to join over there. We ensured that the managers over there were trained in terms of how are you going to work with them, how are the targets going to be defined, how are the other team members need to be sensitized in terms of what are the facilities available for women and how they might be a little different. So this has again to be sensitized for everybody. Then we created small level committees in each one of these centers, which regularly did a one-on-one connect with the manpower or the complete workforce over there to understand how are they feeling, how are the support coming from various channels where they are supposed to be getting it. Are they communicating with their managers effectively? Are any of their queries still unresolved? And if they do not want to talk about or tell us during that, they can come back to us in an anonymous way through the channels which are offered to them, so that we can take care of all these issues. Next slide, please. So in infrastructure, when I spoke about, so all the centers which had female workforce entering, before they did so, we installed closed circuit cameras, and the presence of female workforce security force was made mandatory, as well as including and ensuring that there is a female human resource professional also present over there. We also looked at the facilities holistically in terms to even completely eliminate any dark spots which can appear during the evening or the early morning time or at the night time. So that all the facilities need to be very well lit and the visibility need to be good. We also started providing transport facility to our female employees wherever there was a need for that. And we did a comprehensive and thorough audit on how to ensure that each of these facilities are absolutely compliant in terms of the work environment as well as the infrastructure that they need to support. Moving on to the background verification. So we started doing a comprehensive criminal check for each of the people we are onboarding, to ensure that we are not onboarding any unsavory characters over there. So this has been, this was something which was a question mark with the delays, the speed at which we can onboard. But since this is something which is not negotiable, it has been accepted very well, and it is currently getting absolutely proudly rolled on. Next point was increasing the representation. As we told that we were also facing scenarios where we do not have a presence of workforce in the industry that we can pick and you can add them to our network. So we are also creating those environments where more women will like to join this industry as itself. So we looked at it from various aspects that, okay, are the job description basis which I am going to hire people, first of all, compliant? Are they sending out a message that, okay, I might not be communicating it properly, that everybody and anybody can do a job, and making it unknowingly biased towards a particular gender? So we relooked at all our jobs and the job descriptions and made sure that these are all compliant. Then we also started reaching out to women from alternative channels. We realized that a lot of women take break in India. It can be due to maternity, it can be due to anything else. And if they want to join back the corporate sector, sometimes it becomes a problem for them. So we created a career returner program, which was specifically, you can say, tuned towards that, called a Reignite, where we are able to reach out to the able candidates and give them an opportunity to work with us. Lastly, we also started working with the NGOs as well as other government organizations, where we can get to partner with them to create more opportunities and avenues to broaden our scope of having more people, with the underlying factor that it has got to be a safe as well as a welcoming place to work for everybody.
Thanks, Anish, and that concludes our case study presentations. Thank you all for that. I think, as with the guidance notes, the case studies really bring to life the practical experience of implementation and led us into the challenges and also some of the solutions that companies are working with at present. We have given a lot of time to that because I think it's hopefully really helpful for people to understand about the process of implementing GBVH initiatives within companies and organizations. It leaves us very little time for question and answers, unfortunately, but we are going to throw a few of your questions over to Barbara Ramupsek from EBRD, Diana Baird from IFC, and Sally Neville from SDD, and we'll try and make some brief responses to your questions. And I think we're going to start with Barbara, who was going to respond to questions around trying to make changes and look at reforms in the wider environment to address some of the entrenched issues around masculinity and social norms and so on.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you for all the participants and the speakers, and particularly for the wealth of questions coming in. I wanted to talk very briefly about the wider environment in which we have to see all these activities, the case studies, but also the policies and the recommendations, the best practice, and in a way also the guidance note that we are issuing. Because I think what we see in relation to the incidents and the cases of gender-based violence and harassment is a function of a much deeper rooted problem. It is about perceptions, it is about gender stereotypes, and many of these are not active. They are sort of passively held perceptions in terms of what is acceptable behavior, what is an acceptable type of joke, banter, what is the role of women, what are dress codes, etc. And these are not held only by men, and they are very often also held by women. So there's a lot of capacity building, awareness raising that I think is required. People very often do not necessarily perceive themselves as being disrespectful to women or in fact racist, for example. They just think that this is how things are done, this is our culture, this is how we do things. So in a way, this has to be the starting point. And this is where our activities also focus on working with our clients, working with our policy partners, working with the stakeholders that we have across our region. And in this context, particularly, for example, it can't only be the response to bring more women into stakeholder engagements. Whilst this is very important, it really needs to go beyond that and focus on everybody, and in particular also the role of men. In this context, we have actually undertaken a study to really better understand masculinities, how masculinities are shaped, and then also what that means in terms of gender equality across a range of different countries, Egypt, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, just to mention a few. And this is an important element that we then bring into how we work with our clients, how we build the policy engagement that we have. And then finally, as at EBRD, we in a way also use the leverage we have with our clients, with our policy partners, to look at the wider policy environment and to affect changes and reforms in this context, to open up labour markets for women, entrepreneurship opportunities, but to also focus on issues such as sex disaggregated data, to be able to better shape policy responses, to better understand where the issues lie, and therefore change the socioeconomic environment for women more broadly beyond the specific focus on GBV. So I hope that that answers some of the questions that have been raised in this context.
That's an incredibly comprehensive response in such a short space of time, Barbara. Thank you. Diana, I think there was a particular question for you, but I wonder if you just want to also make some remarks as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm Diana Baird. I'm a principal social development specialist at IFC, so I'm a practitioner. And I did see some questions around grievance mechanisms. And one of the, of course, that's a very difficult issue to go in, because we have both projects that we have existing, clients that have existing grievance mechanisms, both internal for employees and external for communities. Generally, we would look at those existing systems that are in place and try and improve them to be able to intake the complaints around sexual harassment or GBV. The number one, I think, criteria is the survivor-centered approach and following the wishes of the survivor or complainant, and also anonymity if that's what they would prefer. And additionally, I have to say, from our experience at the moment, we, this is quite a journey for all of us at IFC. I mean, we've really just been working on it for the last 3 years. We have a few projects that are having some complaints, so we're working with our clients to provide the support. We've actually, you met Andrea Cullinan in the beginning of the webinar, and she is our now technical expert in-house, and we've been also working closely with Dean over the last 3 years to develop tools for our specialists, because that's the challenge for the lenders is we have a large cadre of environmental and social specialists working globally, and we need to build their capacity to be able to advise and support our clients when they have these issues. So that's one of the big challenges that we are having at the moment, and I guess I'll wrap up there because I know we're running out of time, and I'd like to let Sally have a word in.
Thanks, Diana. Sally, there were a couple of questions I think you were probably going to take, one around risk assessments and also one about interventions where you may suspect that somebody is experiencing some form of GBVH.
Okay, I'll try and be extremely quick. I've got seconds on each one, haven't I? So I'll try.
Well, we'll maybe run over slightly, maybe 5 minutes, just to wrap up and give you a chance to respond. Okay,
I won't be quite so breathless then. Thanks, Paul. So hi everybody. I'm Sally Neville. I was the team leader for the guidance that's been produced. So yes, just on those couple of questions, we had one that was around measuring, how you measure kind of levels of GBVH, and I think there's a really important point to emphasise there, which is that it's very unlikely to be safe for many private sector companies to do that. It requires specialist expertise to collect data on GBVH and to ask people questions about those experiences, and so it's such sensitive data collection that I wouldn't recommend that you go down that route. I think instead, for companies, where I would place your attention is on trying to assess levels of GBVH risk. That's what you really need to know, is sort of what are you working with, and that will help inform what you can do in terms of trying to prevent GBVH from happening in the first place, but also give you a sense, it will equip you with the type of information you need so that you are able to then deal with any responses that are any incidents which are reported later on. It gives you a heads up on the type of the forms of violence and harassment you might have reported to you. Now, in the guidance that we produced that Vidya talked you through earlier, it's some information in the main guidance, but then also annexed at the end of the guidance is it's a tool, which is a set of questions which you can use, and you don't need any GBVH expertise to use them, and you can use them to assess levels of risk, levels of GBVH risk. And the way that they're broken down, there are two sets of questions. One set focuses on country context, so things like existing levels of gender inequality and general levels of violence in society. And then there are a second set of questions that focus specifically on what you're going to be doing in that context. So what type of project or investment or operations you're going to be actually undertaking in that context. And there are questions around, will a large influx of male workers be required? Are seasonal deadlines required? Will it be, you'll be working in remote locations? These are all factors which are explained in the guidance that they are related, they're associated with GBVH risk. So I would urge you to use those and to focus on that. When there's another section in the guidance that focuses on monitoring, and there you're wanting to have a look at whether or not things like people's feelings of safety in the workplace or safety in the community might be changing. And you can ask questions more safely there. I'd still encourage you to draw on GBVH expertise to do that well. But you don't have to ask questions that directly ask people if they've experienced GBVH. You're wanting to get a general feeling for how people feel, the kind of organisational culture might be changing, and also whether or not they're understanding what they're being trained on, for example. So that's on that side. And then just very quickly, there was another question that came through, which was around if you saw somebody who you thought was experiencing GBVH, but you weren't sure, what should you do about that? Some of you might be familiar with what are called bystander approaches, which is particularly in higher income countries, there are a number of trainings which encourage a bystander approach, which is essentially encouraging witnesses of GBVH to act. But I think what it's important to remember there is that in encouraging people to act, they're not always saying you should act by directly intervening. There's also an emphasis on delegating. And I would say that if you were to see somebody who you thought was experiencing GBVH, my main message would be don't rush in. You could make things worse if you're not sure what you're doing. So you could prompt further retaliation, or you could risk re-traumatizing the person who's experiencing violence. So I think ask the question, are you trained to deal with this? And if you're not, who is? And are there existing reporting mechanisms in place within the workplace or the community? Are there established trusted individuals who people are meant to report to? And also to be prepared for if this does turn into a reported incident, are you clear, or your colleagues or others clear on what support services might be available to somebody, so that if beyond something being reported, it can be followed up on, and the person can receive the support that they need and that they want. I'll probably leave it there because I know we're going over.
Thanks, Sally. Great. And thank you everyone for staying online, just allowing a few responses to your questions. We've had a lot of questions, and we are intending to collate those and to produce a question and answer sheet which will respond to them. I'm glad Sally brought us back to the guidance note. A lot of your questions are answered in there, and as Sally says, there are lots of practical tools and guidance to assist you in overcoming some of the kind of challenges that you've described in your questions. So we are very much out of time. In fact, we're over time. So I think it probably just remains for me to thank everyone for their involvement. Thank you very much to all of our presenters and contributors. Thank you to you as participants for your attention and your inputs and your questions. It's been a very rich discussion, I think, and it's raised lots of issues which hopefully you've had addressed through the various presentations. As I say, please go to the guidance and look, and you will hopefully find a lot of answers there, and we will respond to the questions you've raised. This is such a crucial issue, and clearly this is an important initiative in helping everyone to take this forward and try and address some of the issues around gender-based violence and gender inequality more broadly. So I'll close the session at that point. Thank you all again, and good luck in taking this forward within your organisations.